All right, everybody. Aloha Friday. It's been a while, couple of weeks, maybe three, since I've been on the air. Tonight is a special night. Chaman is already with us. Thank you for being with us. We are celebrating Veterans Day in the United States. I happen to be one. Deb has family that are veterans, and she knows some. And it's been such a wonderful day. But we're going to talk about Deb's endeavor, which I am emotionally, mentally tied to. And it has to do with service to nation, service to a branch, namely the Navy. I kind of like the Navy. I don't know. Might have served a year or two. But it's so nice to be with you all tonight. Deb, thank you for being with me on Aloha Friday Live. It's so nice to have you with us. And I can't wait to discuss your project that's coming up. But before we get into all of that great content that we're going to share, tell us a little bit about you, what you're doing now.
All right. Well, thank you, Enrique, for having me on, and happy Veterans Day. It's an honor to be here on this day with you as well. So, yeah, I'm currently the Chief Technology Officer at Sonobe, a place that you and I both have worked together in the past, and it's been an exciting ride there. I've got a new book coming out. That's why I'm here. So, yeah, I'm originally from Huntsville, Alabama, a big Army town.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up there. It's also a big NASA town. So it's kind of like space, and the Army Ballistic Missile Command was there. My dad was involved in the ballistic missile school when I was growing up. Very familiar with a lot of the stuff that was going on out there. I got my brother was a NASA scientist, and I got to see a lot of cool NASA stuff when I was growing up. I saw the Space Shuttle Enterprise land out at Redstone Arsenal when I was a kid.
Amazing.
They had they've got the Space and Rocket Center there with all the Saturn V is on display, which is an amazing tool. And I got into computers thanks to my brother, and have been basically into technology ever since then. It's been a fun ride through here. And then I've always been interested in history, especially early American history.
Right.
So with that, I kind of found a passion.
And I tell you that you mentioned us being at Sonobe together, by far, and I always say this, and I'll say this till I find somebody else to brag about. But by far the best company I have actually had the pleasure of working with and for. Great complement of folks, mainly in the computer science, industry, coding and things of that nature. But I thoroughly enjoyed everyone that I was able to meet and work with while I was there. Our technology, is at the forefront of what you do,
right?
And the forefront of what Sonobe does. You mentioned the history, the since we're talking about Veterans Day, or we're talking on Veterans Day,
right?
Tell us a little bit about the history of your family with the military.
All right. Well, my father was in the military. He joined in 1939, before World War II. He was sent to Panama to guard the Panama Canal, and he saw lots of ships go through there. He saw the aircraft carrier Enterprise, along with other ships, go through the Panama Canal. So that was always a fascinating story. He left Panama in November of 1941 on a troop ship bound for the West Coast, they decided to make a stopover in Honolulu, and they arrived on December 6th, 1941. And the next day, the Japanese attacked, and he recalls seeing the planes fly over and smoke rising from the harbor. And he spent the remainder of his time in the Army in the Pacific Theater. Um, he ended the war in Okinawa. He was scheduled to go in on the invasion of Japan that fortunately didn't happen, because that would have been a tremendous loss of life.
Right.
And he stayed in the Army. Somehow he got involved with the missile program. Werner von Braun was sent to White Sands, New Mexico, to test out the V-2 rockets for the Army. So my dad was there for a short time, and eventually ended up in Huntsville, Alabama, working for the Ballistic Missile School, where he retired after 20 years in the Army. And then he got a civil service job on the arsenal for many years after that. My brother was in the Air Force, and one of my other brothers was in the uniform service of NOAA. A lot of people don't recognize that.
Know it well.
It is a uniform service in some form. And
right.
Spent a lot of time taking soundings off out in the Caribbean.
Well, interesting enough, I have a touch point on all those fronts. You mentioned Hawaii. That's why my show is called Aloha Friday Live. All my years and my love and for Hawaii and the people there. So funny that you talk about going from the canal all the way and shipping out to the Pacific during a time that things were already shaky, but that he would be there
right
the day before. It's like, oh my goodness, where did I come and why? Right? Because that time we only can see video and things that were recorded at the time. But what an experience to be there.
Yeah.
And see that go live, right? Go live.
Yeah, and his ship was docked near the Aloha Tower, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I was in Hawaii, so I went down and found basically the area where his ship was docked, and went out and did the tours of the battleship Missouri, and of course the Arizona Memorial. You have to do that. And my dad was stationed in Hawaii for a number of years, and one of my brothers was born up at Schofield Barracks. And
oh yeah,
so yeah, it was good to go to Hawaii and see some of these things and get a real appreciation for it all.
Yeah, and nice that you have that history of your father being there, your family members being there, and being able to see what they saw. Obviously from a different perspective, but because back in 41 it was totally different. And so yeah, so you have this family history that's tied to the military in one way, shape, or form. You mentioned NOAA, which I love because being an oceanographer myself and meteorologist, we work a lot with NOAA. We have a good rapport there, and you have this history, this family history tied to the military. You have this desire for history. So how did that develop?
I mean, in school, I probably wasn't as interested in history, but the more you read, and the more fascinating some of these stories began. Truth is stranger than fiction a lot of times. So when you read about how this country was created and everything that we went through, the more you read about it, the more fascinating the story of how we got here became. And going to Washington, D.C. and seeing all these historic sites as a teenager, and then reading about how some of this all came about, it just has always been fascinating. So I've read a lot about the founding fathers and those types of things. It's always fascinated me in it. I'm not sure exactly why, but it's always good to hear where you've been so you know where you're going.
Well, very true. And I tell you that others that have a fascination for history that can be contagious. Because I'll tell you that, and I have John Minya. God bless, brother. Thank you for being with us tonight, and happy Veterans Day to you. That is the 15th Pacific Fleet Master Chief that's on there. But your fascination with history, um, and my service in the Navy, we kind of met at Sonobe, and I was able to bring some of that history to the workforce. I remember there was a tie, right, with a certain admiral, a female type, very computer science based, and there was a ship with her namesake in Hawaii. It did not dawn on me to bridge those two until I got to Sonobe and started working with computer scientists, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, and so I just had an opportunity to bridge those two, and we had that little award in a form of a coin, um, and it's amazing how lives can actually cross and interchange some things. I brought some history that maybe was not apparent to computer scientists in the civilian workforce, and was able to share some of that. And then you uh, shared this project that we were about to talk about with me, and obviously being around Navy, a Navy subject, I was intrigued. Although I am not a huge reader, I'm not a huge reader. I love to read things that obviously interest me. And up until this point, history was really not that much of a thing for me, except until I would say 2014, I got an award. I got an award, and it was named over a particular chief in the Navy that was an AG, a meteorologist, and I was able to, I got the first award in his name. And then lo and behold, I had a desire to say, you know what, maybe I should look up his family to see if they even know that there's an award in his name. And as I'm doing the research, I find out they got the name wrong. They had the chief's name wrong. And it was because there was a time in history that if you had a kind of like a nickname, that stuck, and people thought that was your actual name. So he was actually a junior, and since they called him JR, they thought those were his first two initials instead of junior. And so I was able to correct that history, and that blew my mind. I was able to take what I found and the evidence I found and bring it and actually restructure the AG, the meteorology history in the Navy. And on top of that, get the name of the award changed. It blew my mind. And so when you shared with me the project that we're going to dive into here, I was just like, hey, I saw this history thing working before, right? So what other than having seen the Enterprise, and folks, we're going to be talking about her book that's coming up here soon. And talk about there goes that's the proof right there. You saw the Enterprise as a child, during the Spock and all these things, like I did, right? I saw it. I was in love with the Enterprise. You couldn't tell it was a USS, right? A Navy thing, but it is USS. You saw the space shuttle. You was near, a space type things, rockets, all this thing. When did the Enterprise pique your interest to say, let me think a little more about this thing?
Well, I mean, all of those things sort of coincided around the same time. I mean, Star Trek was the only sci-fi on TV in the 70s that really was any good and had any sort of mass market appeal, and it was before Star Wars. And I saw the Space Shuttle Enterprise, and I thought that was really neat. And my dad said, "Well, I saw the World War II aircraft carrier Enterprise," and so it's like I wanted to read more about it. So it's like all three things sort of coalesced at around the same time. And my dad telling me the stories of Pearl Harbor. When I read about the history of the World War II aircraft carrier Enterprise, it was it was on its way into Pearl Harbor as my dad was docking at the Aloha Tower. But there was a storm, and there was rough seas, so she didn't make it into the harbor on Saturday night. Of course, all the sailors were disappointed because Saturday night in port
Oh yeah.
was like, you want to be there. So she was still coming in on Sunday when the Japanese attacked, and was the first ship to see action in the war. So it's like, again, that even piques your interest a little bit more. And then to read about the fact that the ship survived the entire Pacific War, that she fought in 20 of 22 major battles of that war. Um, you couldn't get a more famous ship than the aircraft carrier Enterprise in World War II. And at the end of the book, it said, well, the name continues on in a nuclear powered aircraft carrier, the first nuclear powered aircraft carrier of the day, which brought a lot of more prestige to the name.
Right.
And I mean, it saw action in Vietnam, and it became part of the foundation of the current nuclear navy. Every aircraft carrier after that, except for a couple, were nuclear powered, and that's what we've got today. So it epitomizes like the navy right there.
Yeah, and you talk about the aircraft carrier, right? Now this is your book will highlight something that does not look like an aircraft carrier, right? But because it just wasn't a thing back then. Um, um, and you talk about legacy of service. For those that don't know, the Navy does have in its plan right now. It's getting built. This is the 28, right? Release, I
Right.
believe, that they're about to unveil yet another USS Enterprise. And out of all the ships that get names, this is the one that doesn't have
Named
an
after a
actual
person.
name from a person, right? And so we may end up seeing that spaceship Enterprise if they continue down this road.
Exactly. And I mean, I think SpaceX has had a capsule named Enterprise, and things like that. So it's like the name really has become cemented. I mean, everybody has heard of the Enterprise in some form.
And so we have a vessel that you talk about World War II, you talk about Vietnam. Here, another one's gonna surge us into or usher us into a new era of we don't know what type of
Right.
war we will be fighting at that point, or beyond 28. So the presence of the Enterprise has been part of our naval history for a long time, but it wasn't enough to have that. You started digging backwards. You started going the other way, right? So we're all seeing the Enterprise from wherever we are forward. You chose to go backwards. What led you that way?
Well, when I started reading about the history of the Enterprise, there was several ships named Enterprise before the World War II aircraft carrier, and most things that I've ever seen written usually dedicate a paragraph or two to each ship. And it's like, well, sailing ships, that's like, I wasn't that interested at the time in sailing ships. So I had this knowledge that there was some ships named Enterprise in the past. But I didn't really dig into those that much. And a few years ago, I picked up a copy of Brian Kilmeade's Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates, which talked about the Barbary War. And I didn't really know much about the Barbary War. And so I was like, okay, here's a book that talks about it. This could be very interesting. And as I'm reading the book, the schooner Enterprise, the Enterprise then was a two-masted schooner. It was only about 80 feet long. I discovered it played an extremely pivotal role in that war. It was involved in every major naval engagement of that war in some form. And it's like, how did I not know this? And so I went back and reread some of the history, and it's like, yeah, it just kind of mentions, hey, it did this, hey, it did that. It didn't really go into any sort of detail. And it's like, this sounds like a really interesting ship. So let me go find a book about it so I can read a little bit more. And there really wasn't any definitive book on this ship that was built in 1799 and served for a quarter of a century in the Navy. So I felt this was a story that deserved to be told, and wanted to dig in and research a little bit more. And I was really surprised how much history was there as I started in. And it's like, all right, this is a story that has to be told. So this is how the project sort of began.
Now, you mentioned the Barbary Wars. Most naval historian buffs will understand what that is. Most people that are just living day to day in the United States, they won't even know what that is. But give us a little backdrop to what that looked like as you start down this writing of this book.
Yeah. So obviously I knew a little bit about the Barbary Wars from the book that I read, and most people really only know about the Barbary Wars from the line in the Marine Corps hymn to the shores of Tripoli. And that's just a couple of words. It doesn't really describe a lot. So,
right.
So there's a little bit of a roadmap on, you can see the stories online on where she served. So the first conflict really in the history of the United States was this undeclared quasi-war with France. And the Enterprise was actually built in response to that undeclared war. And I found that war is very well documented from letters and logs and such. So I basically formed an outline of the different things that she was involved in, and spent a lot of time trying to fill in the gaps. The quasi-war, there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. So I looked a lot over these documents and continued just reading more and more accounts. I have a whole bookshelf behind me of books on different things. And for the most part, the story of the Enterprise is documented here and there fairly well in the Quasi-War. It's documented fairly well in the Barbary War. And some events are documented fairly well in the War of 1812, but there's a lot of gaps. And so spending a lot of time trying to fill in the holes. Sometimes I would have here's a 6-month section where I found absolutely nothing. And it was like, it bugged me until I found that she was docked the whole time. Right.
And yeah, that's funny because I, as a person that has had to dig into history because something just did not seem right, and that's how my journey when I was trying to correct this name, I was actually just trying to look to see if this person had family left over so that I can tell them that there's a namesake award for them to be proud of. And I find this element that starts not to jive. Something was wrong, and it just kept contradicting each other. And every time I found something else would be off. And I'm like, how in the world, where we're in an age that everything is identified digitally now almost, could they have missed this? How could you miss this, especially a person? But you learn, the Navy teaches chiefs to be very detailed oriented people, because we have to and are responsible for detailing and making sure that stories are right, because the charge of the history resides in the chief's mess. So we are trained to make sure that detail of histories are kept right, and so that they just made a rabbit hole for me. And you talk about, hey, there's 6 months gap here. This thing is driving me nuts. You find out it's tied to a peer in a workup period where it's just probably getting fixed.
Yeah, and I mean, at least I'm able to explain it, but I mean, I had to dog every one of those down. And then I find, especially during the quasi war, the accounts of what happened in the official record, in the logs and reports, differ from what other people have written in their books. And tracing it back bibliography to bibliography, I finally find that the first captain of the Enterprise, his obituary was wrong. Somebody wrote an obituary.
Wow.
It was not entirely accurate, and everyone quoted that obituary, and that was in their book, and people quoted that book, and people quoted that book. So you have this long line of stuff that's just wrong from the beginning based on an invalid source. So
So
sometimes
you
trying to
mean
pinpoint that is
misinformation?
difficult.
Misinformation has been around for quite a while.
Yeah, and I mean, then there's another one of the biographers, one of the early biographers of Stephen Decatur, who most people will recognize as an early naval hero,
Right.
did a lot of embellishment of the person, and there's accounts in his biography that are just flat incorrect, and people have been quoting his biography for years and years. And so trying to unwind some of those stories to what actually happened. I had a really nice passage on a duel that Stephen Decatur was in with like the secretary to the governor of Malta. Well, it turns out that this guy was not the secretary to the governor. He was just a secretary in the quartermaster supply office. He was really a no one, but he embellished it to be somebody important. So
Yeah, it has to be. If I'm dueling, right?
yeah, so
And
it
for
makes
those,
him sound better, right?
and, you know, for for those that know what dueling is, it was not a pretty thing. I don't think I would challenge anybody to a duel. But a things that were done in for the sake of honor at the time. Now you talk about Malta, and I tell you, when you started diving down and discussing this project with me, I have been to the Med and have been all in the Med. I mean, every port that a Navy ship can land and come into, I've been to, and you don't appreciate those places until you read a book like the one that you're about to release. And having been in these places like Malta, right? You go to Malta. Malta is beautiful. Anybody that goes to the Med, if you don't go to Malta, shame on you. You're missing out. But when you come in and you see that port, I mean, they still have the fort and everything, the walls. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful. Old, like, old style. It's just beautiful. And I enjoyed Malta, and I appreciated the culture, and I appreciated how old things were. I mean, they got the stadium where Paul was preaching to the people, right? I mean, this is old, solid history
Real
that's
history.
there. It's there, right? Yeah. I'm like, oh my goodness, this brother was standing right here talking. Oh my goodness. So you feel like you're part of that history just being there, and being in the same place. But when I started diving in to some of the facts that you were are sharing in this book, I could not help but place myself there because I had been. So, there are places that people will visit and never think of anything of it. It was a nice restaurant. Oh yeah, it was nice sitting in a on a small table right next to the harbor where all the fishermen come in, and you enjoy that stuff. But you have brought an element into, and once this thing releases, you will be bringing to life things that have been dead for a long time. And so that's what excites me more about your project. Now, tell us. So you showed the book. It's entitled what?
It's entitled "The First Enterprise." Try to get it on the camera here.
With a
um,
Z.
with a Z, because it was spelled with a Z back in the day. I mean, you can see from this picture here that it was a rather small ship.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's not just a ship, really. I mean, it was involved in like every major battle of the Barbary War. It wasn't just there; it was there longer than any other ship in the Navy that fought in that war. And one of the other famous ships that was in that war was the Constitution, which
Mm-hmm.
everyone still knows because it's still afloat.
It's there.
Which is everyone should go see that in Boston. It also racked up a record in the Quasi War. It captured or recaptured more vessels than any other ship in the Navy during that war. So it already had a name for itself. And in the War of 1812, it fought the HMS Boxer off the coast of Maine in a ship-to-ship battle that was an epic battle. Both captains on the ships died early in the fight, so the fight was finished with the first officer on each ship, and Enterprise was victorious. So she fought very gallantly in each of these wars, and she made a name for herself in that day. I mean, arguably, she was one of the most famous ships in the Navy at that time, and people knew about it. You read newspaper articles, and they'll say our favorite little Enterprise, and they talk about the ship. It really wasn't until the War of 1812 that like the Constellation and the Constitution really showed themselves and started becoming more famous. And those ships survive to this day, which makes them well known in the Navy. Enterprise only survives in its name, but the original ship really did set the stage. And if it wasn't for all the actions of this little ship, they probably wouldn't have named the World War II aircraft carrier Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
It would have come up with another name. So the Navy chooses their names of their ships well because they do honor heritage repeatedly.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Boxer, which I wasn't on that Boxer, but I was on the steel tin can, right? A tin can Boxer. And we have so much history that repeats itself in terms of names. The Enterprise is one of those that we continue to pay homage and legacy. This next one, folks, it's massive, right? It's like the 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 latest of and the greatest of all. And if you have not seen any of that information go through, the two Olympians that signed that steel plate, right? Which threw me off because I said, wow, normally it's like, spouses of a, generals and things like that. They, in this case, they chose two Olympians to sign that steel plate and get it on the road to to getting done. But I tell you, it's a story that I'm excited for people to get their hands on. Um, so you see the gaps, and you mentioned, hey, it's not just about the ship. If it's not just about the ship, what other things, um, uh, are you going to be talking about?
Well, the ship is just the vehicle, right? So it's
Mhm.
the actions of their commander. So I give a biography of each person that commanded the ship. Several famous names got their start on Enterprise. I mentioned
Mm,
Stephen Decatur. His name came to prominence as captain of the Enterprise. Most people know that he's a naval hero, but most
right.
people really don't know
Mhm.
really how he got there. And sometimes it's from his War of 1812 experience. But he was the youngest person ever to be promoted to captain, and it was as captain of the Enterprise
Look at that.
for his heroic acts in the Barbary War. Also, talk about Isaac Hull, whose first captaincy was the Enterprise, and Isaac Hull was the captain of the Constitution when she got her name Old Ironsides.
Mm,
So a lot of the people that served in the Barbary War went on to be the commanders and commodores of the War of 1812.
right.
The War of 1812, our Navy was probably the best uh, prepared in that war because we had fought the Barbary War. The Army hadn't fought a war since the Revolution, so they really were underprepared when the war came. But the Navy actually had experience at that time, and the Barbary War was that proving ground. We didn't have a naval academy back then, so it was amazing to me how young these people were serving.
Mhm.
Um, you had young teenagers serving as midshipmen. The average age of the captain was young 20s. So
A
it's
captain.
yeah, it was amazing to see what they did and the feats that they pulled off at that time. It's, as I said, truth is more interesting than fiction. It's like you can't make some of these stories up. They're just incredible.
Now I tell you that as I was exposed to what you was working, there's a lot of folks that are out there in the United States, and I always remind people, right? There's 1%, and actually less than 1% now. It used to be a standard 1%. Now it's less than 1% of our citizens that choose to serve in the military. It's just a sample, right? It's a sample when you talk about 99, the rest of the 99% stay home and work in their fields and don't have to deal with the military side. But as I started talking to you about this thing that you was wanting to do, it really highlighted the different areas that people can be patriotic, right? And as a person that, you know, because there's different levels of patriotism, right? There's different levels of patriots. Some are, you know, far right, guns forever and and don't come take my stuff. And then there's all these, where I consider um a passive patriots they love their country, they love the nation, they love the history, they love what things stand for, and they take endeavors like this to write a book uh, that has nothing to do with computer science, by the way, right? Or anything like that, but to reintroduce, if I was to say, reintroduce the current United States to an era in the United States that was poorly uh composed. They did a bad job in making sure that everything fit well and a good story was told. So you are going and this is what I love about what you're doing. You are going hundreds of years back and you're filling in all the gaps so that there's this one place that this history resides where you could say, wow. And I was totally enamored with that book. The story, the how you want to put it, your way of thinking around some of these facts and how you placed it, how you took what would have just been a simple story of a ship and you brought the life out of it. You brought the life out of it. And now you're displaying it in a way where we can actually go through that life cycle of the ship along with all the real people that actually did things on there. And I'm excited, if you can't tell, for this to come out. And when can we expect something where we could pre-order or anything like that?
I think pre-orders are going to be available sometime toward the end of this month, with the release date anticipated before Christmas. Been working with Chris Schaefer at Tactical 16 Publishing. He's been a big supporter of this project, and I would check out tactical16.com. There should be a link coming soon. We were anticipating having it out a little bit before Christmas, and as things go, things take a little bit longer than you always plan, but hopefully we'll have it out by Christmas.
Well, I'm putting Tactical in the comments there so folks can click on that and go see what they're up to. Deb, I am so thrilled that you have devoted your life, right? There's a good portion of your life to making sure that we had the right story, to making sure that some people did not go by the wayside, that some things were correct because some people had embellished some stuff, but that the right story for the right time for the right people was told. And I encourage, and I have been pushing this to the Navy. I'm going to continue to push this to the Navy to make sure it makes their reading list, because I think it's just a piece of history that any sailor would really enjoy. This they will really enjoy this, and having folks be on deployment in the Med and understand what that looks like. Having spent any time in the Atlantic, the Mid-Atlantic, up and down the coast, they will definitely enjoy reading this book. And if there's anything that I can do, it will be to make sure that the new Enterprise has this book front and center on their quarterdeck for everybody to read while they stand and watch. And so I have high hopes, and I know John is listening or will be listening, and we're going to make sure that the Navy is up to speed in terms of this book. and allows it to be shared among every sailor that has served or will serve.
Well, I really appreciate your help and encouragement over these last several years. I've been working on this project for 7 years, so it's exciting to see the fruits of this labor come to fruition.
And I tell you, folks, if you're listening, if you like history, if you like American history, if you like naval history, I will highly suggest that you get a copy of this. We will Tactical 16 Publishing is in the comments. Take a look at them. Once I get all the information from Deb about pre-sales and actual release dates and all that, I will make sure that you have that as part of this live stream or in a post separate to this. But Deb, congratulations on what you have accomplished in the last several years. We met in 2016, so it's been a little bit, and I'm just so happy that you chose to do this. I'm even more happy that the Navy gets to get into their hands a well-composed and well data-driven publication that they could, hang their hat on and say, hey, we got the missing pieces all in one book now. So thank you for being with me tonight. Folks, I will make sure that you have all the information concerning her book. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with, Deb? And how can they reach you and stuff like that?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn as Deborah Spencer. And if you're here in Orlando, we're planning on a launch party sometime either December or early January, where I'll be able to sign copies of the book. So I'm looking forward to seeing you. And I'm again really appreciative of all your help and support over the years.
Well, it's been my pleasure. You are a great human being, and this project that you're on obviously tugs at my heart, being a naval sailor, Navy sailor, and I know will be a blessing to all those other sailors that will be listening and getting this book into their hands. Folks, thank you for being with us tonight. This Aloha Friday Live. Veterans Day, so I wanted to make sure that we had a veteran theme for tonight's live. This book will bless you, even if you are just a normal day-to-day patriot. You will love the way Deb has structured this book, and all the contents in it will definitely leave an impression on you. It has on me, a not so avid reader, turned me into I was stuck on those pages, and I need some more. Even my wife's like, yo, you like that book. But thanks for being with us, everybody. Enjoy the weekend, be safe. This Veteran Day, if you're a veteran, God bless you. God bless you for your service. Enjoy the freebies. Hey, I've been all over the place today, but enjoy this day and this weekend. God bless you all. Be safe. We'll see each other next week.